Well, thank you very much for being here. And I'm not really sure where we want to be with this. I think one of the things that I've had a passion for is development, and I'll be very brief if I can. I'm a preacher, so don't count on it. To discuss what brought us, at least, Washington National Cathedral and the Center for Global Justice and Reconciliation into the work that we've been doing on development and on healthcare issues, and then eventually, if you have any interest in, I think I've been to Iran 5 times in the last 6 years, and just came back from Tripoli and Beirut about 11 days ago after spending some interesting time there on interfaith issues. In 2003, I had a very strange call from USAID. Now, this call came from USAID Faith-Based Development, and it was the result of a letter of agreement that I had signed with the primate of the Anglican province of Southern Africa, who had succeeded Desmond Tutu. The primate's name was the Most Reverend John Nkulu Ndengani. And he and I, back in 2002, merging into 2003, signed an agreement that would connect the resources that we could gather through Washington National Cathedral and through our connections with the government to work in some defined areas that he wanted us to be involved in regarding HIV and AIDS and human rights issues and development issues in Mozambique. So USAID requested a meeting, and we met in Church House on the cathedral grounds, and they encouraged us to move for a first-time grant that would be directed to a local entity. It would be a 5-year, $10 million grant through PEPFAR, and the objective was to develop a program that eventually became called Siyafundisa, which is Swahili for teaching our children. The grant was moved forward over a long period of time. I think it took us 6 months to get it going, and eventually I had a call from President Bush when he was in Texas, cutting brush or something, letting us know that the grant had been approved and we were ready to go. We partnered with an agency out of Jacksonville, Florida, Fresh Ministries, and so working on partnerships on the ground were extremely important for us in developing this first work. The program was focused on educating young people in terms of how HIV and AIDS are spread, also dealing with issues on how to teach people about how important it is to maintain the regimen of medication was available to them, and also training young people in South Africa. We trained a group of over 60 young people who traveled into very remote parts of the province, but primarily in the area of the Highveld, which is an area from Joburg to the Swazi border. And for those of you who know about Swaziland, HIV and AIDS is a huge crisis in that kingdom, the last surviving kingdom in Africa. Its economy has literally been torn apart, not only by disease, but by ineffective governance by King Botswani. So we began this program, and we just completed this program not too long ago. And one of the things that we began to do was to work with FBOs, or faith-based organizations, and also NGOs. And so we worked with some drug companies. We worked with other NGOs in terms of increasing the spread of the work that we were doing in this particular part of South Africa. One of the reasons why the government came to see us was that the Anglican Communion has, like any major denomination, Christian denomination, we have 77 million members or thereabouts, and they're scattered all over the global community. Even in the smallest of villages in Africa, you will find usually an Anglican priest, and you will find a gathering of people. And so what we could do with $10 million is we could do the work we were doing, and the cost to the government was about 4 cents on the dollar, which is significantly low. And so the government was very, very encouraged by that. And we were able to make good on our commitment to deliver the goods. So we had low overhead. 4 cents out of every dollar went to the capacity that was needed in the province of Southern Africa through their HIV and AIDS coordinator. And then we had this huge capacity on the ground. Not only did we have religious leaders on the ground, but we had communities already in place. As this began to unfold, and it became a very successful program, we were approached by the White House regarding PMI, President's Malaria Initiative. We had been working with the Bishop of the Diocese of Maputo, which is the capital city of Mozambique, on a number of programs, and had been working with him on malaria initiatives, prevention initiatives. We had also been working with National Institutes of Health, the National Institute of Health, and also the University of Toronto Medical School, and some research that was being done by the Gates Foundation that had to do with finding a vaccine that could in fact be a preventative, especially for young children, because the mortality rate amongst young children in Mozambique, especially north of the Zambezi River, was significantly high, but it is prevalent wherever there's standing water. PMI was initially a $2.5 million grant. PMI was President's Malaria Initiative, but it was Laura Bush's energy that really brought that to fruition. And so we went back to Mozambique, worked with the Ministry of Health, worked with the bishop, and began a program that was pretty much simplified in terms of malaria prevention. And then from that came a group of folks who were able to leverage over $63 million that would be handled through ADRA, which is the Seventh-day Adventists organization that has done a lot of work in that part of the world. And so we were beginning to work with ADRA on the $2.5 million grant, and then ADRA was very much involved in some of the other dollars that were being spent in Mozambique. The thing that was interesting to the administration here in the United States with PMI was that the work that we were going to do was interfaith in scope. So it involved communities of Christians of every ilk, Seventh-day Adventists and Muslims and Hindus. And at least from that country's perspective, it was the first time that we were able to gather religious leaders from those groups together to begin a cooperative program. Theologically, we didn't agree on a whole lot of stuff, but when it came to malaria, we had a common enemy. And so that prompted a very significant interfaith program that was originally sponsored and supported by PMI. In 2006, the World Health Organization, in its HIV and AIDS division, was brought to Washington to meet at Washington National Cathedral, and their focus was to really look at the work of FBOs, faith-based organizations, and their success rates in terms of dealing with some of these complex health issues, and also some of the economic development issues that were on the ground that were very much targeted through our work on HIV and AIDS in particular. The findings of this meeting were interesting. I wouldn't say the WHO criticized FBOs. What they said was that FBOs do a significant amount of work, very productive work, can deliver the goods better than just about any other organization on the ground in terms of the amount of money spent on operational costs. At the same time, FBOs are probably notorious for not letting anybody know what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of truth for that. And so what we did was to spend a lot of time with WHO and then PAHO, Pan American Health Organization, as we started to do some work through this diocese with the Episcopal Diocese through Central and South America and the Caribbean Basin regarding HIV and AIDS. But their criticism was FBOs don't tell their stories, and so NGO funding sources that are looking for partners have a hard time engaging with the faith and interfaith communities that are doing work on the ground. And the call was for FBOs to do a better job of understanding what they were doing and their interconnectedness with the work that had been done and was being done so that we could be more useful to the WHO. One of the great frustrations that I've had working in Africa through the Anglican Communion and the Episcopal Church in the United States and in the Caribbean Basin has been the inability to find out who's doing what, where, and when. And so there's a huge amount of duplication, and the issue is whose signature is going to be at the bottom of the letter of agreement, or whose signature is going to be at the bottom of a grant that is awarded. And so it tends to be, from my point of view, a very competitive process when in fact it ought to be a cooperative process. And I don't think that that's changed, at least in my denomination, because I have really asked the bishops in the Episcopal Church working specifically in Africa to let us know who's doing what, where, and when, and what the funding sources are, not because we want to horn into those funding sources, but we ought to know what's happening on the ground, and we don't. Quite frankly, we don't. And there's been a lot of waste. There's been a lot of duplicate behavior and program, and that is a frustration that I have continued to possess in my soul with my denomination. Right now, we continue to be engaged in the work that we've undertaken in South Africa. It's sort of morphed a little bit. I had a meeting with the King of Swaziland about 18 months ago about human rights issues in that kingdom. To get a meeting with the King of Swaziland is no easy task. The only way we could do it was to say to the ambassador of Swaziland to the United States here in Washington that if you don't grant this meeting, then we will be your worst enemies in Washington, and we will be very clear about your human rights violations, especially violations against women. Women in that kingdom really have no property rights whatsoever, and if a woman wanted to leave that country to go and visit another country, they would have to get permission from their husband before they could pull a passport. That's just a small part of life in a kingdom that is rapidly disintegrating. So we've been involved in human rights issues. We just received a grant several years ago to work with grandmothers in that kingdom. This grant came from UTO, or United Thank Offering of the Episcopal Church, to really help to educate grandmothers to teach their granddaughters about the spread of HIV and AIDS, and to talk about a culture which is very much defined by multiple partnerships. And that program is in the process of evaluation now, and the report will be delivered to the next General Convention of the Episcopal Church, which will be held in Indianapolis next July. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. The work that we've done in Africa and elsewhere has given us the opportunity to take what we've learned in Africa. I was in North Vietnam last December working with the North Vietnamese Red Cross and the American Red Cross, looking at what we had been doing in Africa to see if it could be placed in that culture, given the fact that in areas like Hanoi, Haiphong, to some extent Hue, HIV and AIDS is beginning to spread, and the issue is how can we prevent that spread. So it's a very interesting relationship between a communist government, the North Vietnamese Red Cross, and the American Red Cross, and we're still working with them on this project, and I will be traveling to Russia in March to work with a project that we started with the Russian government, basically using the same model that we've been using in Africa. Whether that's going to be helpful or not, we don't know. So I'm going to be quiet now. I've preached enough, and but our passion also is the work that we do in the Middle East, and that is very much a very hot topic issue for all of us, I think, in terms of economic growth and development.
Well, thank you. We have about 15 or 20 minutes, and I hope you'll be willing to entertain questions. Let me start with one. I remember during the first meeting that we had when you were visiting Jim Wolfenson, you mentioned that the Diocese of Washington has special relationships with, I think at the time it was 3 countries, which was South Africa, the province of Southern Africa, Honduras, and someplace else. And now you're mentioning Vietnam, Korea, Russia, Iran, et cetera. One of the points I've tried to make to my secular colleagues is that there's a different geography in the faith world that's not necessarily bound by continents or by the classic regions. But I'm interested in how these connections evolved. It's not necessarily sort of coinciding with the majority Anglican or whatever. So is it organic, or is there a strategy? How does it work?
Well, unfortunately, there's no strategy. It's typically a church process, which means very little strategy, lots of hope and prayer. No, I think the word gets out about what's successful and what isn't successful, what costs less and what goods can be delivered at a better rate. And also people look at, the models that you're using and whether they evaluate well or not. The issue of religion is interesting because although, and I'm one of these people, we can get into, I was with E.J. Dionne, and I spent some time with one of his classes here at Georgetown on the role of religion in public policy. Religion, in my opinion, has a great opportunity to leverage a lot of this work in ways that NGOs find somewhat difficult because of suspicions that are raised about what is the bottom line and interest of an NGO. And that's not a criticism, but that's what I hear a lot. And for the most part, it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a Buddhist, whatever. Religious leaders, for the most part, in terms of the parts of the world that I travel in, are respected. And there is a belief that they have, at least coming from this country, some way of communicating need to the federal government. How that process unfolds in the minds of folks is something that I can't comprehend. So in many ways, it's a process that tends to be organic, not well planned, but it's how we have been able to move into North Vietnam and Russia, and with Pan American Health Organization really focusing in on HIV and AIDS in a part of the world where the main development focus in many places is centered around tourism. And if the illness, if the virus spreads, then tourism is going to go south. And if tourism goes south, then you're going to lose a whole economy, which will drive some of these smaller countries. And so that's a big issue.
Let's open it for questions.
I'm killing you, aren't I?
Okay.
Oh, David.
Just give us your take on how you think the U.S. government, is doing in terms of its engagement with religion, its understanding, the role that religion plays in geopolitical events in the world. You've traveled across the globe. You go beyond just the development question to broader foreign policy. Are we doing a better job than we used to? How does that manifest itself? What's your evaluation right now?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure that the United States government really understands and I don't mean to talk this out as an effort to proselytize. I don't think the government really understands the depth and the ability of religious leaders like yourself and others who have strong connections throughout the global community that bring great credibility to who you are, but also what you bring to the table. I don't think they really understand that yet. The reason why I say that was Steve Trachtenberg, who's a good friend, used to be the president of GW, has a course that he teaches, and a lot of the students there are studying to enter the Foreign Service. And so the issue is, let's talk about religion and public policy, and let's really begin that conversation, because that's very important if you're going to be sent to some part of the world where that is a very important piece of the equation. And I was absolutely overwhelmed with the level of ignorance. That's not it's just a statement of fact in terms of people understanding what might be their own faith traditions, let alone the role of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, just to name those three Abrahamic faiths, and the impact that they have on governance issues in the countries where they reside. Although I would say that in working with Iran, as an example, the State Department has finally gotten to a place where it recognizes that Track 2 diplomacy involves more than retired ambassadors. It involves religious people who can cross borders very easily and who have been given pretty much carte blanche, not for any other reason than they have the respect of their religious peers, whether they are Muslim, Christian, or Jew. And that's beginning to move the equation in a different direction. And I'll say this, I mean, I think it was 2 years ago, well, John Meacham called me up one day and said, one of our reporters is in jail after the first demonstration in Iran over the presidential election. We want, and he's got Iranian and Canadian citizenship, but you know people there, can you help? I said, well, why did you call me? I'm on vacation. I haven't seen my grandkids in a year. He said, the State Department told me to call you. The same was true with the hikers. The families called me up, and you know the families, and one of the brothers of one of those incarcerated called up and said, we'd like to come and see you tonight. The families are here. Sarah, Josh, and Shane's families are here. I said, well, why do you want to see me? Well, the State Department said we should come and see you. The same is true, I know, for you and for Cardinal McCarrick and others. So there's this awareness that there's this ability to move into very, very dark circles sometimes that can only be done by those respectful relationships with religious leaders in other parts of the world.
Hi, Samira Daniels. I'm with different groups. This is a question which is kind of a follow-up on one that I asked before. And this is where I have some concerns about the sort of faith-based diplomacy that I've seen. And I've seen wonderful people, and I've grown up in this community. But I wonder to what extent these efforts can really go beyond reifying the traditional hierarchical relationships, which are a problem already there. And while I grant that the religious community has always, the Anglican priesthood particularly, and the hierarchy has made great context there, but to what extent can these faith-based diplomatic efforts really begin to get at the heart, the power of the problem with the nature of power in many of these communities and within the church itself? So.
I learned a long time ago that whatever is the perceived power that the position you hold might have is really not what you really have. I mean, I go to Africa and I'm treated like a diplomat. I'm treated really, it's my Lord Bishop this, my Lord Bishop that, how can I make your life more comfortable? I'll get you a limousine. In this country, it's, hey, John, what's happening? I mean, which is fine. Perceptions tend to be reality. And the work that we do is directed to people who are in political power. That's absolutely important. I met with the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Hariri, last year, just after the election when Hezbollah became very much part of the control of the Lebanese governance structure. And his comment to me was, your country is always a day late and a dollar short. Where were you, and that's in reference to the country, where were you when we were being challenged by Hezbollah? And where are you now, and what can you do to influence some response to this most recent election of your government? So in terms of working in Iran, you don't work through your usual channels. You work through senior clerics and academics in Qom. You work with the foreign ministry and the foreign minister, who is Western educated. It's very difficult to work with the president of Iran, because I have a very minimal amount of respect for him in terms of things that he said about my Abrahamic brothers and sisters. At the same time, I had the opportunity to spend an hour with the Supreme Leader. And the Supreme Leader is the guy who calls the ball. That's where the action happens. And how do you get in to see the Supreme Leader? I don't know. But I will say this, that's where you have to be able to take the message about where things are and where things have to change. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but it's really important. It's just not sitting around and talking about peace and how we can get along. You got to find the leverage that's going to make change, and that's not always easy.
Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it actually, I was asked to be a public member 2 years ago now on a State Department trip to Kazakhstan. And my mission on that delegation was to share a message that both the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had made, and also a statement that President Obama had made regarding human rights violations and the issue of LGBT violence and human rights violations. At the same time, it was to talk about issues regarding HIV and AIDS spread in that part of the world, and it's rampant right now. So we are in the Ukraine working. We had been working with the Russian government for over a year, almost a year, and they have just pulled out. And so I serve on a foundation board that's going to augment the loss of the Russian government support. It's not only about treatment and education. It's about putting pressure on the Russian government to deal with a problem that, if he doesn't deal with it well, will create an absolute chaotic life for the economic development of a country that really, in a sense, is not necessarily the most cohesively governed country in the world right now. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but we're working in several clinics modeled after the work that we've done in South Africa. Most of that work was done in informal settlements outside of Johannesburg and moving forward toward the Swazi border. So we have done that in Russia, but money is a big issue right now as the global economy shrinks. But again, these things all find a way of linking themselves together. Who would have believed a trip to Kazakhstan on a State Department delegation would have led to the work that we're now doing in the Ukraine on the issue of HIV and AIDS, and then leveraging resource money and using the experience of South Africa to try and get things going, and pushing the Russian government to say yes when they're now saying no. Because there is not really a big AIDS problem in Russia, as you probably know.
Well, I think that this picture of one diocese, granted a very important diocese in the United States, and the complexity of its relationships and the insights that it gains is a wonderful contribution to this discussion. Or you want to say something?
I just say, when you talk about the globalization of economies, and we look at what's happening to the economies of this planet right now and the impact that that has on our own life in this country. And the bottom line for all of us who have been brought up with an understanding that we can have life better for our children and we can have more rather than less, need to get a grip on our lives and understand that that is not going to be the way for my children and my grandchildren. It's not going to happen. That's because of the globalization of economy. I'm not an economic wizard. The other is the globalization of religion. And that's something that we don't talk a lot about. The globalization of religion, no one knows where that's going. But what we do know is that Christianity and Islam are going to grow very rapidly. They're going to grow at a very conservative theological basis. And those two religions, if you will, Abrahamic and nature, are conversional religions. And how that works itself out in developing countries and economies is going to have a huge impact on the stability of the global community in the years to come. And we have got to understand that. And if we don't understand that, the best understanding we have about economic growth and development and global stabilization is not going to help us. And that's a message that we've got to get in our heads now. And if we don't, I think we're in real trouble. And I think we're already seeing that happening as we look at what might or might not be economic growth due to the Arab Spring and what's happening now with the presence of Islamicists taking over some of the governments in those countries, and what does it mean to be modeled after Turkey, or where is that going to take us in terms of the economic development of these countries? So.
Well, we are going to miss you sorely in Washington, though we're counting on you staying deeply involved in both the development and the peace work. And as you were just, I think, illustrating so insightfully in that last comment, in finding better ways to link the two. In other words, to link the opportunity that we have in today's world for a better life for the world's citizens, but the disruptive effects of the profound changes that are taking place. Yeah. So thank you so much for being with us. We wish you a very happy, brief retirement, followed by continued engagement.
And I'll be thinking about all of you because I will be going back to our home in San Diego, California. So I'm going to turn the Weather Channel on in February and say hello. Thank you very much.